Hey, I'm Pastor Landon.
Hey, I'm Pastor Joshua.
Welcome to the Cutting Room Floor. Welcome to the Cutting Room Floor. We're so excited to join you this week. And this week, as we talk about, these conversations are extensions of the pulpit and the sermons that we're preaching through on Sundays and all. We're wrapping up a sermon series of going deeper. And we've looked at these ideas of how do we go deeper within evangelism? How do we go deeper within discipleship, small groups? How do we go deeper within our community of the church? How do we go deeper within our worship? And today we're going to look at this idea, this kind of in a thread of our conversations, I feel like over the past few weeks, this idea, and it sounds a bit redundant, but it makes total sense to me. And I hope we can make it make sense over the next few minutes of being intentionally intentional.
Yeah.
Intentionally intentional. And so as we think about that, I want to start with a question today. I want to throw this out here for you, Joshua. What does an active, and I think that word's important, active Christ follower look like?
Cool. I think as we begin there, something that'll be helpful for us is maybe to paint a picture of what activity is and what passivity is. And so passivity is oftentimes just going through the motions, just rolling with it, whatever happens, happens. But passivity in a Christian's life could look like, I'll get to my Bible reading when I get to it, or I'll pray when I have the time. Things like that. I'll go to church if it's convenient. Stuff like that in your life can look like passivity. Activity involves intentionality.
Yes.
To where action is, no, I'm not putting my Bible reading off, or I'm not putting my prayer off. I'm not putting this conversation off. I'm going to do it right now. So a good example of that and what an active Christian could look like is that, you have that opportunity to have that conversation with that coworker or with that friend. Passivity would look like, I'll get to it when I get to it. Activity is, you know what? I maybe just missed this opportunity. I'm actually right now going to circle back and go back and have this conversation.
Absolutely.
Or it's that moment of you have that awareness of this conversation's at hand. I'm going to act on it. We're going to do it right now.
Yeah.
It's that choice to engage. It's that choice to not put off. It's that choice to follow Christ now. So active Christians, very simply, look like Jesus looked.
Yeah.
We look like him. So what would he do? Would Jesus act in this moment? Would Jesus pray in this moment? Would Jesus speak into this situation? Would Jesus help this person? Would Jesus reach out right now? And if the answer to that is yes, then you do it.
Sure.
So being an active Christian is looking like Christ.
Absolutely.
Anything you would like to add there?
I think those are all really great ideas and really great thoughts. And this idea of activity and passivity and the passivity is just a plague, that exists within the human life, and we're passive about many things, and it's at its absolute worst when passivity creeps into our life with Christ and our following of Christ and living out the life that he's called us to live. And so, yes, I believe 100% then that being an active Christian is absolutely living like Jesus, that reality of denying myself daily, taking up my cross and following after Jesus. To follow takes intentionality.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Absolutely.
If you stood up right now and started walking and said, I'm going to take you somewhere, you got to follow me. Well, I couldn't just sit back and be like, I'll catch up in a little bit. We have to
get out of the chair, right?
I got to get up. I got to move. I got to go after you, and
I can't follow you and see it.
And that's the reality that there's an intentionality that has to exist, that I have to get up and I have to move in order to follow.
Yeah.
And so if I want to experience the journey that you want to take me on, then I've got to be very intentional to go after you in that moment, And so I think that's what an active Christian looks like, is someone who is intentionally following after Jesus.
So that leads me to think about this. What are the dangers? What dangers are there of being passive?
Oftentimes when I think about the life of a Christ follower, my brain oftentimes goes to Ephesians 6, where Paul talks about putting on the armor of God and this idea of us being soldiers, and that we're enveloped and our armor is the things of God and the truth of God and the aspects of God. And but I think about this idea of a soldier, and I think even within modern warfare and ancient warfare and all of these aspects of warfare, soldiers are never passive. Or let me say that good soldiers are
Or
never
never
passive.
passive.
If
Mhm.
they sit around passively, that's at the moment that the attack is the most exceptional because they're not ready for it and they're not looking for it, nor are they trained and in a position and in a posture to defend it. And so I
Mhm.
think for us as Christ followers, then passivity opens the door
Yeah.
and creates the posture for us to be attacked in any form or fashion from the lies and the schemes of the devil,
Yeah.
and this reality that we're so susceptible in this moment to these frivolous attacks and the idleness that comes along with passivity, leading us to the desires of our hearts that we were never intended to desire to begin with,
Mhm.
but because we're passively living within this life. And so I think passivity ultimately leads us to spiritual weakness
Mhm.
and creates a
100%.
very, very dangerous place for us as we live in a fallen world. And so it makes us very susceptible to the lies and the schemes of Satan within a fallen and broken world, things that will destroy us if
Yeah.
we're not careful.
And we can see those problems, I think, very easily. You can look at marriages, you can look at parenting problems, all those sorts of things. But if you're a husband, if you're a dad, if you're a wife, a mother, and you're passive in that relationship, that will lead to pain and complications in your family. It's
Yeah.
just the reality of it. And so that's true in every setting of life. Passivity can lead to many, many problems for us.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
so as we look at then this, how we counter passivity, and as we
Mhm.
look at this activity that needs to exist and this idea of being intentionally intentional, I think back to our very first conversation when we were talking about going deeper, this just broad idea of
Yeah.
what it means to go deeper. And both of us, as we were looking at this new year, this idea that there was discipline that we
Mhm.
wanted to create and to exist within our lives. And oftentimes we hear that word discipline, and particularly within the church where we preach the freedom of grace and the freedom to walk in the gospel. And then we hear this word discipline and we kind of coil up like, oh, is that a bad
Mhm.
word? And so let me ask you that question. Why is discipline not a bad word in the church?
Yeah. Well, we see it and even in Paul's own like teachings in the New Testament and stuff, but like a good example for us is that imagery of an athlete,
Yeah.
the athlete who is preparing. And if we're honest with ourselves in the church, there's been a lot of lack of discipline and there's a lot of lack of people prepared to run the race that God has called them to. And that's led to a lot of weak Christians. There are a
Absolutely.
lot of Christians who can't compete because they're not disciplined. They're not trained. They've not done the weight training. They've not done the distance running. They've not done the perseverance training. And so there's that discipline in the different aspects of our lives that leads us to be a better Christ follower and to be about the mission he's called us to. So discipline isn't a bad word. Discipline is necessary to live out this walk with Christ that we're called to. And if we're not disciplined, we're not following him the way that we should.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I, I don't think I can say that any better, but I think about it from from my own life. Right now, I'm not in a position to run very far. Like
Mhm.
my physical
Sure.
state is
If I'm doing
not there.
push-ups, I'm not doing a lot.
However, there was a time in my
Yeah.
life where I could run miles. I used to run 6 or 7 miles,
Mhm.
and I think about that image. It was out of discipline of starting small
Mhm.
and growing, more and more, and being able to add on to that. And I think that again, I sometimes I think we have this almost this kind of fantasy idea that we bring to the faith, when the reality of it is God says the humanity and the things that are true of our everyday lives are what should also be true of our faith, and how, like,
Yeah.
he created us as humans. And so what's true of our physical exercise, of our mental exercise, how do you learn to read a whole novel? Where you got to start by learning a word,
Word. Yeah.
and then you've got to learn another word,
Yeah.
and then you got to be able to put sentences together,
Yeah.
and then paragraphs, and it grows. The same is true for us, as a lot of people, I feel like they have that same mentality of, I need to lose some weight, and it needs to be 100 pounds. No, you need to lose 5 pounds to start with. Same is
Yeah.
true within our faith. This
Mhm.
idea then, like, when we're intentional, when we're thinking about discipline, looking and being honest with ourselves of what is it that I'm not doing that I need to be doing within the faith
Yep.
to grow deeper with God, and then taking that one step,
Yep.
and then knowing that there will be another step, but that second step can't happen until the first step happens.
Yeah, and those steps that we're celebrating too. That makes me think immediately. Right now, Karis is at the point where she's learning to read and learning to write, and so like even this week, we celebrated the fact that she had wrote like 2 words by herself, and it's like for an adult writing 2 words is like, yeah.
Right.
For her, it's like we're
Huge.
clapping and cheering
Absolutely.
and
It's
like, yeah.
tremendous.
So each part of that discipline journey is worth celebrating.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
that's the beauty of the church as we walk through this discipline together. That we show grace to each other,
Mhm.
that within your discipline processes, spiritual disciplines of life, and within mine,
Mhm.
those things may look very different, but there's no pious attitude that exists within that. No, we're all championing each other, that this is who God's called us to be, and so, I think, again, use that analogy and keep it going. A marathon runner,
Yeah.
is you hooping and hollering for somebody that accomplishes their very first run mile, like,
Yeah.
that's huge, because they knew at one point they ran their first mile somewhere.
Yep.
And so this idea of discipline, then, it's healthy, it's good, it's right, it's the way God made us, and it must be true. And so, so quickly, what are those spiritual disciplines that
Yeah.
must exist within the life of a believer?
Wonderful. So actually, I would recommend a resource for everyone. We give out different books here at Southside to guests, and we have one of those that's on the spiritual disciplines. It's a great read. Do you remember the author's name?
Donald Whitney.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Had the pleasure of studying with him,
Awesome.
yeah, in seminary.
Great resource available for everyone. Check it out. It'll be helpful in this conversation. But there are many things in our life that are disciplines, especially spiritually. Think of your prayer life, think of your devotional life, think of your worship, think of how you're sharing the gospel. Are you being discipled? Are you discipling other people? Some of the things he points out that I want to point out here that can be very beneficial is journaling. One of those is like writing out. We've had that conversation before of sometimes you don't know what you're feeling or how to express something until you actually get it out on written word. That can be very beneficial. One of those things that has grown to be more and more meaningful to me is silence and solitude. Finding those places of rest and resting in Jesus, and not so much just like a one-sided conversation of like me doing all
That's
the
right.
talking.
Yeah, here I am, Jesus, listen up.
Yeah, but doing some listening.
Yeah.
And so those are some of those. What are some other ones you can think of?
I think those are all wonderful. I love that idea of journaling, and particularly for men. I think we as men don't, that's not sometimes our natural. But I have learned that even, there's so much that lives in our head and our heart, and when we write those things down, they become true. Like we see it, and all of a sudden it's like even the burdens, like those burdens they're not here anymore, and they're not weighty. They're on that piece of paper. Like I got that out, and then we can also then begin to really wrestle with that. Okay, of how do I address that? What do I need to do with that? What does that look like? How is God growing me? To be able to go back, and have those markers, to be able to look, see. So I love that idea of praying, being in our word, being in the word of God, journaling, looking at your life of how are you just spending enjoyable time. I love to date my wife. We've been married, almost 17 years now, and dating her is still one of my most favorite things. And it's just it's that intentional time of gathering together, but then enjoying one another. And I think sometimes we get so regimented again in this idea of spiritual discipline. Have the intentional time of setting aside and saying, okay, world, it's my time with God, but then enjoying him. Sometimes for me as a musician, that's me at the piano, just playing and singing songs to the glory of God, and so it can even look different for us in our individuality. And so I think, though, the biggest thing that I think we've got to stress in this moment is as we think about intentional, we've got to start small.
Yeah.
If you're not doing anything, start somewhere.
Yep.
Start somehow. Look at prayer, look at Bible reading, look at journaling. Look at different aspects. Put yourself in God's creation, and take a 10-minute walk in a park. Like, be intentional about just gathering with God
Yeah.
and giving him all of our attention and experiencing him in that relationship that he so desires with us. And Christ died and resurrected so that we could have this relationship. It's the most beautiful opportunity for us. And so to be able to enjoy that is, we've got to be intentional. But once we are intentional to get to that place,
Yeah.
it's so glorious
Yeah.
and enjoyable, And so I think as we, think about that, the final word in that intentional, is that reality. Then these things are important and consistent. How do you encourage someone to be consistent?
Yeah. That's a really good question. Being consistent, I think, is one of the problems that many of us face in different parts of life. Because honestly, if we're honest, we probably want to be disciplined. We probably desire those different things that we've talked about. Like, we desire to follow him more, but it takes that times of, it's not just once and done. It's every day.
Right.
It's every week. And so I love this imagery, and I've used it before. I remember hearing it at seminary at Southeastern, but this idea, even in sanctification, where today is a new day, and we have in the student center, there is a basketball thing set up. And what you imagine is grabbing one of those balls and then taking a shot. And as you begin to shoot those shots, you're going to miss. There's going to be times where it misses. But what's key is the next day you pick the ball back up again. And so oftentimes we can get to the place where we shoot the shot, we miss, and then we leave the ball alone for a second. And so we've got to get to the point where we're consistently shooting the shot, and over time, and as we continue following Christ, we'll begin to make more baskets.
Amen.
And so that's, I think, is key in this conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as we finish, that's our prayer for you, is that you'll keep taking those shots.
Yeah.
Pick that ball up, take those shots, pursue after God, be intentional, and be consistent within that lifestyle. And it will it'll start to become default and true of who you are. And so we're so thankful for this conversation today. We're thankful for you. We're excited that you joined us here on the cutting room floor, and we'll see you again here next time.
Bye.